What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Babbles Nonsense podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about my little 2, possibly 3, I don't even know what week we're in, stint off social media and kind of how that let me research our dopamine responses. If you haven't heard that social media, increases our dopamine or causes dopamine spikes, then you've probably been living under a rock because it is definitely a buzzword these days. So yeah, that's what we're going to dive into a little bit, is nerding out on some dopamine. So let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back. So like I said in the intro, we are going to talk a little bit about dopamine. So I want to expand a little bit on why I have decided to give up social media. So, I mentioned on this podcast before that I'm trying to get more into my faith and just learn more about Jesus and all the things. And me and my friend Lori, we do discussions on our Bible studies and stuff like that we do. And one of those things is Lent. And I do go to church. Sometimes I watch church from home. You don't have to be perfect. But I was like, what am I going to give up for Lent? And then I had to try to understand what Lent truly was. And y'all don't come after me. I was not someone who grew up in a church, and it's something I'm not going to say everything perfectly, and I may get it wrong. But the biggest thing for me, I kind of knew the basic principles of Lent, like giving up something that you would consider, quote unquote, an idol in your life, or something that may be distracting you from having a closer relationship with God and that, and then to also understand and appreciate the sacrifice that He made for us, which is one of the cooler things that I feel like I didn't realize as much as just giving something up, because that's one of the things that we think about the most. So I was like, what am I going to give up? Because there's not a lot that I really do. So I was like, let's give up social media. I've been wanting to do a social media break for a while, but I keep making excuses, just being like, well, there's the podcast and I have to post and yada, yada, yada. But then I was like, okay, there are other apps where you can post from. They have the Edits app for Instagram, CapCut for TikTok, where you don't have to be in the social media platform itself to post. I was like, so you can still post your podcast. Stop making excuses. So what I did first was I deleted all the apps off my phone. So obviously I still have my social media profiles, but I'm just not actively on social media. And I deleted all the apps off my phone, so Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, leaving my Instagram Messenger because that's how we communicate for book club. But I then start getting more notifications than I have ever gotten, and I'm like, that's odd. I've deleted this app off my phone. Why am I now getting more notifications? And before we get into the notifications, I noticed that first several days, maybe days 1 to 4, I kept reaching for my phone every couple of minutes, and I was just instantly obviously put it down, because I was like, why am I reaching for my phone? I know I don't have any of my apps, but it just made me realize how truly addicted we are to our phones. Even if I was at work, just picking it up, why? So anyways, that it did slowly get better. But I made it 1 full week not signing into my accounts and things like that. But then I signed into my account. I'm not going to lie about it. I signed into my account, and it was mostly to clear these notifications, because I'm not kidding. I was getting more notifications than I had ever gotten when I had them on my phone. And so I logged in, cleared my notifications, and then logged back out, because I was like, I'm not going to scroll. I'm still going to keep my promise of not scrolling. So then I actually physically logged out of my apps, and then this time kept them on my phone. And so during the second week, I would grab my phone, but far less than I was the first few days. And I would then go to the app, and then it was obviously log in, and I was like, nope, not doing that. It's too much trouble. We're not doing that. So we're doing good. But the biggest thing with me for this is that that's when it hit me okay, this is about more how hard it is to give up something that you want to do in human form, where, when Jesus died on the cross, he did it, willingly and without hesitation, where here I am hesitating, like, can I make it through Lent? Can I do this? Which is the bigger message for me. But anyways, I digress. Going into how this all fits with dopamine in today's world. So we're going to nerd out just a little bit. Bear with me again. This is just from the research that I have done, and doesn't necessarily mean I did the best research. I don't know. It's just from kind of like what I've learned and kind of already knew a little bit. So we all know that dopamine and serotonin, like, those are what they call our happy hormones. And that's where, like, sometimes, like, if they're low, you might have depression, anxiety, and things like that. But we hear more about serotonin because you hear a lot about SSRIs, which those are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, medications like Zoloft, Celexa. You might have heard of those, where people take them because someone's like, oh, you probably just have low serotonin. But we don't often hear about, like, low dopamine per se. And I've learned a little bit more about it, just being on social media. But also, if y'all can remember a few weeks back, I had a whole conversation with my doctor that I talked to y'all a little bit about, where my therapist had mentioned, like, you may have a little ADHD. I've noticed some patterns in our conversations. And she was like, talk to your physician about it, which I did. And he was like, well, I could see that. But he was very honest with me. And he was like, it's really hard in an adult, especially a high functioning, meaning like you've learned to live with it or control it. Because when you go to take the test, which is a questionnaire with a bunch of questions on it, you can kind of answer in your compensatory response way that you would answer versus how you would have answered it before you learned compensation mechanisms. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense. And he was like, so the only way I personally feel that we're going to know is if you just try the medication, which I had mentioned to all y'all. Like, he put me on Adderall. I took it for like a week and was like, this is just not for me. I will say it did make my brain, I guess, slow down. I was able to, so in my normal day-to-day life, unmedicated, I'm able to, like, multitask. I'm able to be working on something at work, like researching charts. And then if I also do mentorship in my job, like if the mentees that I'm mentoring message me, I'm able to, like, do that while still doing articles and waiting for them to respond. And it's just worked very well for me. Like, I feel normal if I have multiple tasks going, which is probably not quote unquote normal, but what really is normal? We don't know. But this medication, when I tried it, it really slowed me down. Like, I was not able to focus on multiple things at once, which I found to be weird because I had always heard from people who took Adderall in college, which I never did, that it just made them focus better. And so I was talking to my doctor about this when I followed up, and I was like, I don't know, it just makes me feel slower, if you will. Like, I feel like I can only, focus on one thing at a time, but I did notice I was less irritable. I had more patience, and I was just like, I did like those things, but I didn't like how slow I felt. And then it does, like, at the end of the day, because if it's not the extended release, it's in and out of your system shortly. Which I suffer with insomnia, so we didn't try the extended release. But anyways, there was a little bit of a crash at the end of the day, which made me feel more tired. And I was like, I don't like this. But after, like, talking to friends who have ADHD and have taken medicine for a long time, they're like, no, that's a normal body's response. But again, when I say normal, guys, this is a whole spectrum of normal. We don't know what normal is. I'm just using this word because I don't know any other word to use. But my friend was like, no, that's a pretty normal response. That means you do need it. She was like, because it's not normal for someone to be able to focus on 20 things at one time. Like, our brains aren't designed for that. And we think we're focusing on it, but we're not giving everything 100%. And that's sometimes where burnout comes in, or just having a low dopamine response in general. But yeah, all that to say how our dopamine gets low. So we talked a little bit about serotonin and dopamine, but dopamine is our more rewarding neurochemical. So what I've always thought was that when you do something rewarding, and that could be anything, like scrolling social media, I know that doesn't sound like quote unquote rewarding, but like that's rewarding your brain with something, or like you eat something really flavorful or good or something that you were craving. It could be pretty much anything. But when you trigger that reward response, I used to think that it happened when you got the reward. But per the research that I did, the dopamine spike actually comes before the reward. So it doesn't matter what the reward outcome is, whether it be good or bad reward system, it's what you're doing. So for example, things like playing a slot machine or gambling, those types of things, if you think about it in that visualization, like when you pull the slot down for the slot machine, when you pull the slot, that's when your dopamine spikes because you don't know what rewards you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to win and you don't know if you're going to lose. And that's where the actual spike happens, which I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. That's where that logically makes sense with addiction because you don't know the outcome, and that's the whole anticipation of it all, is that intrigues your nervous system because it's like when you're watching a scary movie or you go to a haunted house. A lot of us do those things because even though the reward is being scared, nobody likes being scared. You then like it if it's a fake scaredness. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. But in my brain, that's how it works and it makes sense. So doing things like scrolling social media and answering messages or having notifications constantly on your phone, like maybe you have a job where you're constantly getting emails. So that constantness of it all is going to continue spiking our dopamine. So if you think about the slot machine example and how that relates to like getting an email, when you open your email, you have no idea what's going to be on the other side of it. If it's going to be a work disaster or it's going to be, someone quitting or whatever it may be. So your brain is still anticipating, like, is this going to be good? Is this going to be bad? So that anticipation is the dopamine spike. And then the more we have those, the more, fast-paced society that we live in, the more dopamine spikes we're going to have. And then over time, if this is constant, which it is constant in our today's society, then we end up lowering our dopamine because think about it like this, like weight loss. We all know, like, which I've done a podcast on this before, like the whole calories in, calories out method and how people undereat. And then you just have to eat less to lose more, eat less to lose more. That's the kind of same response with the dopamine. The more of it you have, the less response you're going to get from it. So you need more stimulus and more stimulus and more stimulus to get that same response. Another good example that like helps me get a visualization would be like drinking alcohol, I guess you will. Like maybe when you first started drinking, if you waited till you were 21, maybe one or two drinks, beers, whatever you drank, got you buzzed because you really never had it before. But then let's say you're in college, you're drinking, every weekend and your tolerance goes up. Then that 1 to 2 drinks that made you buzzed before now becomes 4 or 5 drinks that to get the same buzz. So you're chasing that same feeling. And that's the same thing with dopamine as well. You're chasing that feeling, that reward, good or bad. And the more you chase it, the more you need. And so it creates this vicious cycle. And then one may ask, well, how do we fix that? And it can be very hard in today's society. Like I know that I have a job where I can't turn my phone off. They have to be able to get to me because I take care of patients. And that in itself can sometimes, I didn't realize, feel so overwhelming because I've never been one, like I can leave my phone in my car and be fine if I'm with friends and stuff. But now, like where I used to do that, like I would leave my phone in the car and I would go in and visit with a friend so that I'm fully paying attention to our conversation. I can't do that anymore with this job. So sometimes it's not as easy, but there are other things we can do, whether that be, going on a social media break or trying to do slower activities that don't spike your dopamine as fast and as much, like going back to the simple things like reading, going for a walk. Like it takes longer for that dopamine spike to happen because the reward system takes longer. So like, for example, if you're going for a walk and let's say you walk for an hour, that dopamine release may not happen until 2 or 3 hours after your walk. Whereas something as fast as scroll every 7 to 15 seconds on social media, So going to do a lower dopamine activity or just cutting out things where you can is probably the best advice I could give you, since I'm not a psychologist and this is just something I was interested in when I was coming off my social media break, which kind of is ironic because me and Minu, I think a few months back, had talked about burnout. And the more I was like hearing the symptoms of low dopamine, which are like feeling tired, feeling exhausted, feeling unmotivated, difficulty focusing, mental fatigue, feeling restless, or maybe constantly seeking that stimulation, even feeling bored even while you're doing something. Like, I know that I've been on social media and been like, I'm bored, even though I'm stimulating my brain. Maybe you have difficulty completing tasks. So those are really a lot of signs of low dopamine, but they're also signs and symptoms which can be diagnosed as ADHD. Like, a lot of those symptoms really overlap, which we know that ADHD also has a strong genetic component, but when you think about ADHD, it is a low dopamine activity in the brain. Now, some of that comes from like as soon as your brain makes dopamine, it can also be absorbed really quickly, or maybe your body doesn't absorb it all the way. That's where the genetic component comes into it, which, interestingly enough, I actually took a genetic test for like ADHD and depression that looked at the way your body processes serotonin and dopamine, which I was hoping would be back before I recorded this podcast, but I don't think it's going to be back for just a couple more days. So I will update you guys. But it was really cool. I saw this other girl who had ADHD take it so that she wouldn't have to keep trying a bunch of different medications. And what it does is it kind of takes your genetic component and tells you how your brain works with serotonin and dopamine. And then it takes all the psychiatric medications and ADHD and ADD medications and then compares them to your genetics based on the chemical profile of the drug and how it's going to respond in your brain with your genetics, so that you're not, it's more of a thing so that you can, like, number one, understand why your brain works the way it does sometimes. And then number two, you're not trying 500 different medications, just trying to get the right one and experiencing all the side effects, which is one downside of, our healthcare system, which, not to get off on a tangent on that, but you would think insurance companies would pay for these genetic testing so that you're not, trial and erroring a bunch of drugs. It would make more sense to do it this way, but they don't, and I digress. What were we talking about? Oh, okay. The symptoms of low dopamine and ADHD symptoms overlapping. So going back to the conversation that I had with my doctor, like, that makes sense what he said now. Like, it would be very hard to tell if you just are a low dopamine response person, or you just have a low dopamine or you have ADHD. So like, the low dopamine response could be you're strongly burned out in life, in relationships, in work, because, you just have all this high chronic stress in your life, versus do you truly have ADHD? So I'm interested to get this genetic study back and kind of see what it says. And then the last thing that in my research I found, which I kind of felt was cool, was how much like things kind of start in the gut. I don't know if you're new to this podcast, but I used to love, I still love it, but like, I used to really love nutrition and things like that, mostly because with my, thyroid, Hashimoto's, that's what I did in my 20s, is I researched everything I could about it, which I remember now thinking back, like, so there's this thing called the gut-brain barrier and then the gut-brain axis. And so a lot of our hormones and serotonin and not dopamine, but serotonin are made in the gut, and it travels to the brain via the vagus nerves, which makes sense because how else where do we get these things? Like, when I was doing research, like, to find out that you need like healthy levels of, I believe it was iron, B6, magnesium, and then something else to even develop the dopamine. So how would you do that if the dopamine is mostly made in the brain and you need all these other nutrients and vitamins to help surplus it? Then obviously it's got to come from the gut, because that's how we intake our food. So I was like you would think like logically sometimes when you read something, you're like, oh, well, that obviously makes sense. But it was also an interesting fact because I know a lot of people wouldn't think that, our hormones are made in our gut. And so we have to have a strong, healthy gut, which is where, like, when I was learning about nutrition and eating very whole, clean foods, which I have digressed a little bit from and trying to get back on that track. It was just interesting enough to be like, okay, wow, gut health is in everything. Like when I was learning about the thyroid, and now when I was learning about this low dopamine response, like here it is again. So maybe we'll do a whole nother like gut episode with Adrian so we can talk about like all the hormones and how important a healthy gut is, because that can be a whole nother topic in itself. But anyways, if you're listening to this, just know that your brain probably didn't suddenly become lazy, unfocused, or bored one day. It's probably just adapting to the environment that we live in, which is just having stimulation everywhere. Because one of the facts that I found was that it was researched that we have more stimulation in today's society in 1 hour of scrolling on social media than humans have ever experienced in like days, even weeks in generations past, which when we think about that, we're just like, well, makes sense. But maybe the solution isn't always, being more productive or trying to find productivity hacks or more apps to help us or more stimulation here. Maybe the answer that we're truly seeking is just, we've got to go back to the times of doing less, like having less noise and having less scrolling and less constant newness all the time. We have to learn that boredom isn't something our brains are supposed to escape. Historically, boredom was the space where creativity and deep thinking emerged. But today, it's like we rarely give our brains that opportunity to experience it anymore. So if you've been feeling mentally scattered, maybe unmotivated, or constantly reaching for your phone like I was, it's probably not you personally failing. It could just be biology interacting with an environment designed to capture our attention at every second. And just sometimes maybe the most powerful thing that we can do for our brains is just to step away from it for a little bit. Like I said, I know it was hard for me in those first couple of weeks with the social media, but it's actually becoming more normal. Like even when I click the app, I'm like, what am I doing? Like I don't even want to be on this. Because our attention in this world is probably one of the most valuable resources that we have, because we get to control where that attention focuses. And right now in today's society, a lot of things are trying to take that attention, like look over here, look over there. And, maybe that's the challenge in today's society. Maybe it's just trying to learn how to take back our attention. Because I think for me, when I stepped away from social media, just for the short time that I've done it, I felt like the hardest part wasn't missing the content or the scrolling. I think it was just truly realizing how much of my attention I had slowly been giving away without even noticing it. So maybe that's the challenge that we offer up and we challenge ourselves, not to learn how to use all this new technology, but learning how and when to put it down. Because like I said, our attention is one of our most valuable things that we have. And with the world being as chaotic as it is, like everything's trying to take our attention, like look over here, look over there. And I think the more that we just give our attention to better rewarding systems or slower rewarding systems, we're probably just going to do ourselves a favor in the long run. But yeah. Thank you guys for listening to me nerd out on this topic and definitely babble. I hope we all learned a little something. And if you found yourself thinking like, oh, this is definitely me, then do not beat yourself up too much, because obviously this is me. This has probably been everyone at some point or currently. And it's not a personal flaw. I think honestly, it is a little bit of biology interacting with our environment that we live in, and we have to do better at biohacking. Like that's why all this biohacking is out, because it's just healthy for us. And yeah, until next time, guys. Bye.